In the grand halls of Windsor Castle, where whispers carry secrets and shadows hide truth, a young princess's fierce love for her brother would set in motion events that no one could have predicted. When 9-year-old Princess Charlotte discovered her beloved brother Prince George lying unconscious in the palace gardens, his clothes torn and bearing mysterious injuries, her innocent world shattered. But what happened next would prove that even the youngest members of the royal family possess a strength that can move mountains and command empires. With tears streaming down her face and determination blazing in her eyes, Charlotte looked up at the towering royal guard and spoke words that would echo through the palace corridors for generations. "Find who hurt my brother." What seemed like a simple request from a frightened child would uncover a web of palace intrigue, hidden enemies, and family secrets that reached the very heart of the British monarchy. This is the extraordinary true story of how one little girl's love sparked an investigation that would change the royal family forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Princess Charlotte skipped along the stone pathway, her pink dress dancing in the gentle breeze. She had been looking for her brother Prince George for nearly an hour, eager to show him the butterfly she had caught in her tiny hands. The palace staff had grown accustomed to the siblings' games of hide and seek throughout the vast estate, but today felt different somehow. Charlotte called out his name as she rounded the corner near the ancient oak tree where they often played together. Her voice echoed off the stone walls of the castle, but received no response. The 9-year-old princess felt a flutter of worry in her stomach as she ventured deeper into the secluded area of the gardens that their mother had warned them about exploring alone. It was then that she saw him. Prince George lay motionless near the ornate fountain, his usually pristine clothes dirty and torn. His face was pale, almost ghostly white, and there was a dark bruise forming on his left cheek. Charlotte's butterfly escaped from her trembling hands as she ran toward her brother, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "George, George, wake up," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him on the cold stone. She shook his shoulder gently, then more urgently when he didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, and when she touched his forehead, it felt cold and clammy. Panic rose in her throat as she noticed scratches on his arms and what looked like rope marks around his wrists. The princess looked around frantically, hoping to see someone, anyone who could help. The gardens seemed eerily quiet, with only the sound of water trickling from the fountain and the distant chirping of birds. She knew she had to get help quickly, but the thought of leaving George alone terrified her even more than staying. Commander James Morrison was making his regular patrol around the castle grounds when he heard the desperate crying. The veteran royal guard had protected the family for over 15 years, and he could distinguish between the playful shrieks of children and genuine distress. This sound made his blood run cold. He immediately changed direction, following the source of the crying toward the fountain area. What he discovered when he arrived would haunt him for the rest of his career. Princess Charlotte was kneeling beside her unconscious brother, tears streaming down her face as she tried unsuccessfully to wake him. The scene looked like something from his worst nightmares about protecting the royal children. "Your Highness, step back, please," Commander Morrison said gently but firmly as he knelt beside Prince George. His trained eyes quickly assessed the situation, noting the injuries and the suspicious circumstances. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately hurt the future King of England. Charlotte looked up at the imposing figure of the guard, her eyes red with tears but blazing with an emotion that surprised him. It wasn't just fear or sadness he saw there, but a fierce determination that seemed beyond her years. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and spoke with a clarity that made his heart stop. "Commander Morrison," she said, her young voice steady despite her tears. "Someone hurt my brother. Find who hurt my brother." The words carried such authority and pain that the seasoned guard felt compelled to action immediately. "I will, Your Highness," he replied solemnly, already reaching for his radio to call for medical assistance and backup security. "I promise you, we will find who did this." As the emergency medical team arrived and carefully lifted Prince George onto a stretcher, Charlotte refused to leave his side. She held his hand as they carried him toward the castle, whispering words of encouragement that she hoped he could hear. The royal doctors were already preparing the medical wing, and within minutes, George was receiving the best care available. While the medical team worked on her brother, Charlotte sat in the waiting area with her parents, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. The news had spread quickly through the palace. and security had been heightened immediately. But Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about Commander Morrison's promise. She needed to know who had hurt George and why. The initial medical reports were both relieving and concerning. Prince George was stable but had suffered a concussion and several injuries that suggested he had been restrained and possibly drugged with a mild sedative. The rope marks on his wrists confirmed that he had been tied up, and the location where he was found indicated that someone had deliberately placed him there. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Williams arrived at the castle within 2 hours of the incident. She had worked royal protection cases before, but nothing quite like this. An attack on a member of the royal family was not just a criminal matter, but a national security issue. As she interviewed Charlotte about what she had seen and found, she was struck by the young princess's composure and attention to detail. "Tell me exactly what you saw when you found Prince George," Detective Williams asked gently, sitting at Charlotte's eye level in the palace library where they had set up a temporary interview room. Charlotte took a deep breath and recounted everything she remembered, from the moment she started looking for her brother to the discovery near the fountain. Her memory was remarkably clear, and she provided details that would prove crucial to the investigation. "He was lying on his side," Charlotte explained, using her hands to demonstrate. "His shirt was torn here." She pointed to her own shoulder, and there were marks on his arms like someone had grabbed him really tight. His face was dirty, and he had grass in his hair, but not the kind from where he was lying. It was different grass, darker. The detective made careful notes, impressed by Charlotte's observational skills. The detail about the different grass could be significant in determining where George had initially been attacked before being moved to the fountain area. As the day wore on, the palace buzzed with activity. Security footage was being reviewed, staff members were being interviewed, and a thorough search of the grounds was underway. But it was becoming clear that whoever had done this had planned it carefully and knew the castle's security patterns well. Commander Morrison found himself thinking constantly about Princess Charlotte's command. The way she had looked at him, the authority in her young voice, and the trust she had placed in him to find justice for her brother weighed heavily on his mind. This wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. It was about honoring the faith of a little girl who believed in his ability to protect her family. The investigation team discovered that the attack had likely occurred in a secluded area of the estate near the old stables, where the different grass Charlotte had noticed was found. Scuff marks in the dirt and broken branches suggested there had been a struggle. Someone had then carried or dragged Prince George to the fountain area, possibly to buy time before he was discovered. As evening approached, and Prince George remained unconscious but stable, Charlotte refused to leave the medical wing. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand and talking to him about their plans for the summer holidays. The doctors assured her that talking to him was good, that he could likely hear her even while unconscious. "I told Commander Morrison to find who hurt you," she whispered to her brother. "He promised me he would. He's the best guard in the whole castle, and he won't give up. Nobody hurts my brother and gets away with it." The palace staff who overheard these words were moved by the young princess's loyalty and determination. Word spread quickly through the corridors about Charlotte's brave discovery of her brother and her firm command to find his attacker. Many of them had watched her grow up, and they were seeing a side of her that revealed the strength of character that would serve her well in her future royal duties. Commander Morrison worked through the night, coordinating with Detective Williams and reviewing every piece of evidence they had gathered. The attack appeared to be the work of someone with inside knowledge of the royal family's routines and the castle's layout. This made it both more personal and more dangerous. The security footage from the main areas of the castle showed nothing unusual, which suggested that the attacker had either avoided the cameras deliberately or had authorized access to areas not under surveillance. The guest list for the past week was being scrutinized, along with any recent staff changes or deliveries to the castle. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, Prince George began to stir. Charlotte, who had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, woke immediately when she heard him mumble her name. His eyes fluttered open, and though he was confused and groggy, he was conscious and responsive. "Charlotte," he whispered, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "I'm here, George," she said, squeezing his hand. "You're safe now. You're in the medical wing, and the doctors say you're going to be fine." Prince George tried to sit up, but winced in pain. The memories of what had happened were fragmented and unclear, but he remembered being grabbed from behind while exploring the old stables. There had been a man, someone he thought he recognized, but the details were fuzzy. Commander Morrison was summoned immediately when word spread that Prince George was awake. As he entered the medical wing, he saw Charlotte sitting protectively beside her brother, and he was reminded once again of her powerful words from the day before. The investigation was just beginning, but he had made a promise to a little girl, and he intended to keep it no matter what it took. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Williams leaned forward in her chair as Prince George struggled to remember the details of his attack. The young prince's memories came in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle scattered by a strong wind. His parents, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, sat nearby, their faces etched with concern and barely contained anger at whoever had dared to harm their son. "Take your time, George," Detective Williams said gently. "Any detail you remember, no matter how small, could help us find who did this to you." Prince George closed his eyes, trying to concentrate despite the throbbing headache that made thinking difficult. "I was exploring the old stables," he began slowly. "I heard a noise, like something falling. When I went to look, someone grabbed me from behind." Charlotte listened intently from her position beside the bed, her small hand still holding her brother's. She had refused to leave his side since he woke up, and the medical staff had allowed her to stay after seeing how much her presence comforted him. "Did you see the person who grabbed you?" Detective Williams asked. George shook his head slightly, then winced at the movement. "Not at first, but when he turned me around, I thought I recognized him. He looked familiar, like someone I had seen around the castle before." Commander Morrison, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped closer. This detail was crucial. If the attacker was someone who had regular access to the castle, it narrowed their list of suspects significantly, but also made the situation more dangerous. An inside threat was always the most difficult to detect and prevent. "Can you describe what he looked like?" the detective continued. "He was tall, taller than Papa," George said, glancing at his father. "He had dark hair and was wearing work clothes, like the gardeners wear. But his hands were soft, not rough like someone who works outside all the time." Charlotte squeezed her brother's hand encouragingly. She was amazed by how brave he was being, answering all these difficult questions when she knew he must be feeling scared and hurt. Her admiration for her brother grew even stronger as she watched him help the investigation despite his pain. Detective Williams made careful notes about the physical description. The detail about the soft hands was particularly interesting. It suggested someone who might dress like a worker but wasn't actually involved in physical labor. This could be someone disguising themselves or someone who had recently changed roles within the castle staff. "Do you remember anything else about what happened after he grabbed you?" she asked. George's face scrunched up in concentration. "He put something over my mouth and nose. It smelled sweet, like medicine. After that, everything gets fuzzy. I remember being somewhere dark, and my hands were tied behind my back. I kept thinking about Charlotte and wondering if she was looking for me." At this, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. She needed to be strong for George, just like he was being strong now. She thought about her command to Commander Morrison and felt a surge of determination. They were going to catch whoever did this. Commander Morrison cleared his throat. "Your Highness, you mentioned the person looked familiar. Do you think you might have seen them recently? Perhaps in the past few days or weeks?" George nodded slowly. "I think so. Maybe during the garden party last week. There were so many people there, but I remember seeing someone watching us kids play. He was standing by the kitchen entrance, but he wasn't dressed like kitchen staff." This revelation sent a chill through the room. The garden party had been a major social event with dozens of guests and temporary staff. Security had been tight, but not as restrictive as for official state functions. Someone could have used the event to study the royal children's routines and identify vulnerabilities. Detective Williams turned to Commander Morrison. "I'll need the complete guest list from that garden party, plus everyone who worked the event, including temporary staff and vendors. Also, I want to review all security footage from that day." "Already being prepared," Morrison replied. "We're also expanding the investigation to include anyone who has had access to the castle grounds in the past month. This level of detailed knowledge about our routines suggests extensive observation." The Duke of Cambridge spoke up, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I want to know how someone managed to get close enough to my son to do this. Our security is supposed to be impenetrable." Commander Morrison felt the weight of responsibility heavily on his shoulders. The royal family's safety was his primary duty, and this attack represented a serious failure in their protective systems. But Princess Charlotte's trust in him to find the perpetrator gave him the motivation to dig deeper than ever before. As the medical team came in for their hourly check on Prince George, Detective Williams stepped out with Commander Morrison to discuss their next steps. The corridor outside the medical wing buzzed with discreet activity as additional security personnel had been brought in to strengthen the castle's defenses. "We need to consider the possibility that this was more than just an attack," Detective Williams said quietly. "If someone took the time to drug George and move him to a specific location, they might have been planning something bigger. Maybe they were interrupted, or maybe this was just the beginning." Commander Morrison nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. The location where he was found, near the fountain, it's visible from several windows in the main castle. Almost like whoever did this wanted George to be found there specifically." They were interrupted by one of Morrison's junior officers, Sergeant Peters, who approached with a tablet displaying security footage. "Sir, we found something you need to see. It's from the garden party footage." The three of them huddled around the tablet as Sergeant Peters played the video. The footage showed the garden party in full swing, with guests mingling on the terrace and children playing on the lawn. After several minutes of normal activity, Peters pointed to a figure near the kitchen entrance. "There," he said, pausing the video. "This man was there for over an hour, and he spent most of that time watching the royal children. He's not on any of our guest lists or staff rosters." The man in the footage was exactly as Prince George had described: tall, dark-haired, and wearing work clothes that didn't quite fit the role he was supposed to be playing. Most telling was his behavior. While genuine workers moved with purpose and efficiency, this man's attention was focused entirely on observing the children's activities and routines. "Can we get a clear image of his face?" Detective Williams asked. "We're working on enhancing it now," Sergeant Peters replied. "But what's more interesting is what we found when we tracked his movements throughout the day. He didn't just watch the children, he was mapping the estate. Look at this." The sergeant showed them additional footage of the same man walking through different areas of the castle grounds, always staying just within the boundaries of where guests were allowed. But his path traced a systematic exploration of potential entry and exit points, security camera positions, and guard patrol routes. Commander Morrison felt his jaw clench. This was clearly a professional reconnaissance mission, not a random act of violence. Someone had sent this man to study the royal family's security and identify weaknesses. The attack on Prince George might have been a test run for something much larger. "I want this image distributed to every member of our security team," Morrison ordered. "And I want to know if anyone recognizes him from anywhere else. Also, check with MI5. This kind of systematic surveillance suggests professional training." As they continued reviewing the footage, they discovered something even more disturbing. The man had positioned himself to observe not just the children's activities, but also the security responses to various situations throughout the day. When a guest had fallen and needed medical attention, he watched how quickly medical staff responded. When a delivery truck arrived at the service entrance, he noted which guards checked it and how thoroughly. Detective Williams felt a growing sense of urgency. "This wasn't just about Prince George," she said. "Someone is planning something bigger, and they used a child as a test subject to see how our security would respond to an incident." Back in the medical wing, Princess Charlotte had fallen asleep in her chair again, still holding her brother's hand. Prince George was dozing fitfully, occasionally mumbling in his sleep. The Duke and Duchess had stepped out briefly to make urgent phone calls to other security agencies, leaving the children under the watchful eye of two female protection officers. Nurse Catherine Mills, who had been caring for the royal children for several years, noticed that Prince George seemed to be having a nightmare. She gently woke him before the dream could become too distressing. "It's all right, Your Highness," she said softly. "You're safe. Your sister is right here with you." George opened his eyes and immediately looked for Charlotte, relaxing when he saw her sleeping peacefully beside him. "Nurse Mills," he whispered, "I keep remembering more things. Should I tell the detective lady?" "Of course, dear. Any memory that comes back could be helpful." George struggled to organize his thoughts. The sedative had made everything fuzzy, but some details were becoming clearer as the drugs left his system. "I remember being in a dark room. It smelled like old hay and motor oil, and I heard voices talking, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. It wasn't English." This new information was immediately relayed to the investigation team. The description of the location suggested somewhere on the estate grounds, possibly one of the older outbuildings that weren't regularly used. The foreign language detail was particularly significant, suggesting the involvement of international players. Commander Morrison organized search teams to investigate every building on the castle grounds that matched George's description. The old carriage house near the stables had been used for storage, and smelled strongly of both hay and oil from vintage machinery. When they arrived with search dogs and forensic equipment, they quickly found evidence that someone had been held there recently. Rope fibers that matched the marks on Prince George's wrists were found tied to a support beam. The hay in one corner showed clear signs that someone had been lying there, and chemical analysis revealed traces of the same sedative found in George's blood. Most importantly, they found footprints in the dust that didn't match any of the castle staff who had legitimate reasons to be in the building. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that this was indeed a professionally planned operation. The choice of location, the timing, and the careful attention to security details all pointed to someone with extensive training in surveillance and kidnapping techniques. But what remained unclear was the ultimate objective and whether there were additional threats still to come. Detective Williams called an emergency meeting with all the senior security personnel. The situation was escalating beyond a simple assault case into what appeared to be a national security threat. The attack on Prince George might have been just the beginning of a larger plot against the royal family. Princess Charlotte's simple command to find who hurt my brother had uncovered something far more sinister than anyone had initially imagined. As the investigation expanded and more agencies became involved, everyone involved remained focused on the promise made to a little girl who trusted them to bring her brother's attacker to justice. The enhanced facial recognition software had been running for 6 hours when it finally produced a match. Detective Chief Inspector Williams stared at the computer screen in disbelief as the system identified the man from the garden party footage. The name that appeared made her blood run cold. Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative who had supposedly died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Commander Morrison looked over her shoulder at the screen, his expression grave. If Petrov is alive and operating on British soil, this goes far beyond a simple attack on Prince George. We're dealing with international espionage. The revelation transformed the investigation from a criminal case into a matter of national security. Within hours, MI5 agents had arrived at Windsor Castle, and the case had been classified at the highest levels. But, through it all, Morrison couldn't forget Princess Charlotte's unwavering faith that he would find her brother's attacker. Her trust drove him to push harder for answers, even as the case spiraled into dangerous territory. Agent Rebecca Hammond from MI5 brought with her a thick file on Viktor Petrov and his known associates. As she briefed the team in a secure conference room deep within the castle, the true scope of the threat became clear. Petrov specialized in what the Russians call active measures, operations designed to destabilize Western governments through psychological warfare and targeted attacks, Agent Hammond explained. His supposed death was clearly a cover story to allow him to operate under a new identity. Detective Williams studied the photographs and intelligence reports spread across the table. But why target Prince George? What could they possibly gain from attacking a child? Terror, Morrison said grimly. If they can reach the future King of England inside Windsor Castle, they can reach anyone. It's a message about British security vulnerabilities. Agent Hammond nodded. But there's more. Our intelligence suggests this might be connected to a larger operation called Crown Fall that we've been tracking for months. The goal appears to be systematic attacks on the credibility and safety of the British monarchy. Meanwhile, in the medical wing, Princess Charlotte had finally been persuaded to take a break from her vigil beside Prince George. She sat in the family's private drawing room with her mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, who was trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the chaos surrounding them. "Mama," Charlotte said quietly, "Commander Morrison promised me he would find who hurt George. Do you think he will keep his promise?" The Duchess looked at her daughter's earnest face and felt her heart break a little. At 9 years old, Charlotte was being forced to confront the reality that their family faced constant threats simply because of who they were. "I believe he will, sweetheart. Commander Morrison is a very good man, and he cares about our family very much." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "I told him to find who hurt George because I knew he was the only one who could do it. He has kind eyes, but they're also strong. George always says that Commander Morrison would protect us no matter what." Unknown to Charlotte, her words were about to be tested in the most serious way possible. Intelligence intercepts had revealed that Petrov was not working alone and that additional attacks were planned for the following day. The royal family was in immediate danger, and decisions had to be made quickly about their security. The investigation team had traced Petrov's movements over the past month through various surveillance systems across London and the surrounding areas. They discovered that he had been conducting surveillance not just on Windsor Castle, but also on Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, several other royal residences. The scope of his reconnaissance suggested a coordinated campaign against multiple members of the royal family. He's been building detailed profiles of security procedures at each location, Agent Hammond reported to the emergency council that had assembled. The attack on Prince George appears to have been a test of response times and protocols. Commander Morrison felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The safety of the entire royal family now depended on their ability to anticipate and prevent Petrov's next move. But the man was a trained professional with years of experience in evading capture. Prince George's condition continued to improve, and the doctors were optimistic about his full recovery. However, the psychological impact of the attack was becoming apparent as he struggled with nightmares and anxiety about being alone. Charlotte had become his constant companion, reading to him, playing quiet games, and providing the comfort that only a loving sister could offer. "Tell me the story about the brave knight again," George requested as Charlotte sat beside his bed with a book of fairy tales. "Which one? The one who fought the dragon or the one who saved the princess?" "The one who saved the princess," George said, settling back against his pillows. "I like that one because the knight never gave up, even when everyone said it was impossible." Charlotte smiled and began reading, but her thoughts drifted to Commander Morrison and the real-life knights who were working to protect their family. She had overheard enough conversations between the adults to understand that the situation was more serious than anyone had initially thought. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. One of the castle's cleaning staff, Maria Santos, approached Commander Morrison hesitantly as he conducted his evening security rounds. She had been debating whether to speak up for days, worried that her information might not be important enough to bother the investigators. "Commander Morrison, sir," she said nervously, "I think I saw something that might help with finding who hurt Prince George." Morrison immediately gave her his full attention. In his experience, some of the most valuable intelligence came from people who observed details that others missed. "What did you see, Maria?" 3 days before the attack, I was cleaning the guest rooms in the East Wing when I heard voices speaking in a foreign language. It sounded like Russian, maybe. I looked out the window and saw 2 men talking near the old carriage house. One of them was taking photographs of the building. Morrison's pulse quickened. "Can you describe these men?" "One was tall and dark-haired, like the man in the pictures you've been showing everyone. The other was shorter and heavier, with a beard. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, like they had been there before." This information was immediately shared with the investigation team. The presence of a second suspect explained how Petrov had managed to carry out such detailed surveillance while also planning the actual attack. They were dealing with a coordinated team, not a lone operative. Agent Hammond ran the description of the second man through intelligence databases and found a possible match: Dmitry Volkov, another former Russian intelligence operative who specialized in technical surveillance and communications. If Volkov was working with Petrov, their capabilities were significantly enhanced. "We need to assume they have detailed intelligence on all our security measures," Hammond warned the team. "Volkov is an expert at intercepting communications and identifying weaknesses in electronic security systems." The net began to close around the conspirators when surveillance cameras at a hotel near Heathrow Airport captured images of both Petrov and Volkov. They had been staying there under false identities, but their faces were clearly visible in the footage. More importantly, the hotel records showed they had been in contact with someone using a British phone number. Detective Williams worked through the night to trace the British contact. The phone records revealed a pattern of calls to and from someone identified as Dr. Margaret Thornton, a curator at the British Museum who specialized in royal artifacts and history. On the surface, she seemed an unlikely conspirator, but further investigation revealed troubling connections. Dr. Thornton had recently been passed over for a prestigious position as Royal Historical Advisor, and her financial records showed significant gambling debts. More damning was the discovery that she had used her museum credentials to request detailed floor plans of several royal residences, claiming she was researching historical room layouts for an academic paper. "She's the inside source," Morrison realized as the pieces fell into place. Thornton provided detailed intelligence about the royal family's routines and security arrangements. That's how Petrov knew exactly when and where to strike. The timing of the arrests had to be carefully coordinated to prevent any of the conspirators from escaping or destroying evidence. But as dawn broke over Windsor Castle, Morrison received word that Dr. Thornton had not reported to work at the museum and was not answering her phone at home. When police arrived at her apartment, They found it empty except for a sophisticated communications setup and detailed surveillance photos of the royal children. Most chilling was a calendar on the wall with several dates circled in red, including the day of Prince George's attack and 2 dates in the immediate future. Agent Hammond studied the calendar with growing alarm. The next date is tomorrow. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. The royal family was immediately placed under the highest level of security protection. All public engagements were canceled, and additional armed guards were deployed to every royal residence. But Petrov and Volkov had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only the evidence of their careful planning and the threat of more attacks to come. Princess Charlotte sensed the increased tension around the castle, though the adults tried to shield her and George from the full truth. She noticed more guards in the corridors, hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, and the worried expressions on her parents' faces. "Commander Morrison," she said when she encountered him during one of his security checks, "you look very serious today. Are you still working on finding who hurt George?" Morrison knelt down to her eye level, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, Your Highness. We're getting very close to finding the people responsible, and we're making sure that nothing like this can happen again." Charlotte studied his face with the intensity that only children possess when they're trying to understand adult concerns. "There's more than one person, isn't there? That's why everyone looks so worried." Her perceptiveness continually amazed Morrison. "You're very smart, Princess Charlotte. Yes, there are several people involved, but we're going to catch all of them. I promised you we would find who hurt your brother, and I keep my promises." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "I know you do. That's why I told you to find them. George is getting better, but he still has bad dreams sometimes. I want the people who hurt him to go to prison so they can't hurt any other children." As Morrison continued his rounds, he carried Charlotte's trust with him like a sacred responsibility. The investigation had revealed a conspiracy far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. But the simple faith of a little girl who believed in justice remained the driving force behind his determination to see it through to the end. The hunt for Petrov and Volkov intensified as every intelligence agency in the country joined the search. But the 2 trained operatives seemed to have anticipated the investigation and had prepared multiple escape routes. Time was running out, and the next attack date on Dr. Thornton's calendar was rapidly approaching. Whatever the conspirators had planned, it would happen soon, and the royal family remained in mortal danger. The abandoned warehouse in East London was supposed to be empty, but thermal imaging from the police helicopter showed 2 heat signatures inside the building. Commander Morrison checked his weapon as he prepared to lead the tactical team that would attempt to capture Viktor Petrov and Dmitry Volkov alive. 3 days had passed since Dr. Thornton's apartment had been discovered empty, and this was their first solid lead on the whereabouts of the Russian operatives. "Remember, we need at least one of them alive to tell us what else they've planned," Agent Hammond whispered into her radio as the team surrounded the building. "According to the calendar we found, today was supposed to be another attack date." Detective Williams coordinated the operation from the mobile command center, her eyes fixed on multiple screens showing feeds from cameras positioned around the warehouse. The building had been under surveillance for only 2 hours, but, in that time, they had confirmed the presence of sophisticated communications equipment and what appeared to be weapons preparation activities. Inside Windsor Castle, Princess Charlotte sat beside her brother's bed, reading him another story to help pass the time. Prince George was feeling much stronger and had been asking to return to his normal activities, but the heightened security meant that he and Charlotte were confined to the secure areas of the castle until the threat was eliminated. "I wish I could go outside and play football," George complained, looking longingly out the window at the sunny gardens where they usually spent their afternoons. "Soon," Charlotte assured him, though she didn't fully understand why they had to stay inside. "Commander Morrison is working very hard to make sure we're safe. When he's finished, we can go back to playing in the gardens." George nodded, trusting his sister's explanation. At 7 years old, he was still too young to fully grasp the complexity of what had happened to him. But Charlotte's presence made everything seem more manageable. She had been his constant protector and comfort throughout the ordeal. Back at the warehouse, the tactical team had positioned themselves at all possible exits. Morrison felt the familiar pre-operation tension that he had experienced countless times during his military service before joining Royal Protection. But this mission felt more personal than any he had undertaken. Every time he thought about Princess Charlotte's trust in him to find her brother's attackers, his resolve strengthened. Movement on the second floor, reported Sergeant Peters through the radio. Two figures, one near the east window, one moving toward what looks like a stairwell. Morrison made the decision to move. All teams, go. Remember, we want them alive. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as the tactical teams entered from multiple points simultaneously. Flashbang grenades illuminated the dark interior as officers moved through the building with military precision. Morrison led the team up the main stairwell, his heart pounding as they approached the second floor where Petrov and Volkov were believed to be located. The first gunshots came from the east side of the building. Volkov had apparently decided to fight rather than surrender, and the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the warehouse. Morrison's team reached the second floor just as Petrov emerged from what appeared to be a makeshift command center, his hands raised in apparent surrender. "Don't shoot," Petrov called out in accented English. "I surrender." But Morrison had been trained to recognize deception, and something in the Russian's body language suggested this was a trick. As his team moved to secure Petrov, Morrison noticed the man's right hand was positioned suspiciously close to what looked like a detonator attached to his belt. "Bomb!" Morrison shouted, diving forward to tackle Petrov before he could activate what was clearly an explosive device designed to destroy evidence and possibly kill the arresting officers. The two men crashed to the floor in a violent struggle. Petrov was stronger than Morrison had expected, and the fight was brutal and desperate. The Russian operative was clearly prepared to die rather than be captured, but Morrison was fighting for something more than just completing a mission. He was fighting to keep a promise made to a little girl who believed in justice. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, the gunfight with Volkov had ended. The technical specialist had been wounded in the leg and was now in custody, but not before he had managed to destroy most of the communications equipment with a carefully placed incendiary device. Morrison finally managed to overpower Petrov, securing the detonator and handcuffing the Russian before he could activate any other hidden weapons. As the warehouse was secured and the suspects were taken into custody, Morrison felt a wave of relief wash over him. But he knew the mission wasn't complete until they understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Dr. Margaret Thornton was arrested 6 hours later at Dover, attempting to board a ferry to France with false identification documents. In her possession were detailed floor plans of Buckingham Palace and what appeared to be escape routes marked in red ink. During interrogation, she broke down and revealed the extent of her involvement with the Russian operatives. "They promised me enough money to pay off all my debts," she sobbed to Detective Williams during the recorded interview. "I never thought they would actually hurt a child. They told me it was just intelligence gathering." The information Dr. Thornton provided helped investigators understand the timeline and objectives of the conspiracy. The attack on Prince George had indeed been a test run for a much larger operation plan for the Queen's upcoming birthday celebration at Buckingham Palace. Petrov and Volkov had been gathering intelligence for a coordinated assault that would have targeted multiple members of the royal family simultaneously. When Commander Morrison returned to Windsor Castle late that evening, his first stop was the medical wing to check on Prince George and to fulfill his promise to Princess Charlotte. He found both children in the family's private sitting room, where Charlotte was teaching George a new card game while they waited for news about the investigation. "Commander Morrison," Charlotte exclaimed when she saw him enter the room. "Did you find them? Did you find all the people who hurt George?" Morrison knelt down so he could look directly into her eyes, just as he had done when she first gave him his mission. "Yes, Your Highness. We found them. All 3 of the people who were involved in hurting your brother are now in prison, where they cannot hurt anyone else." Charlotte's face lit up with a smile that made all the danger and difficulty of the past few days seem worthwhile. "I knew you would keep your promise," she said simply. "Thank you for protecting my brother." Prince George looked up from his cards with a more solemn expression. "Will they try to hurt us again, Commander Morrison?" "No, Your Highness," Morrison replied with complete confidence. "They will not be able to hurt you or anyone else for a very long time. And we've learned from what happened to make our security even better." The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge entered the room at that moment, having been informed of Morrison's successful return. The relief on their faces was evident as they learned that the immediate threat to their family had been eliminated. "Commander Morrison," the Duke said formally, "I understand we owe you and your team a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid." Morrison shook his head respectfully. "Your Grace, I was simply keeping a promise I made to Princess Charlotte. She trusted me to find who hurt Prince George, and I couldn't let her down." As the family reunited in the safety of their home, the investigation continued to uncover the full extent of the Russian intelligence operation. Petrov and Volkov were revealed to be part of a larger network that had been planning attacks on democratic institutions across Europe. The disruption of their British operation had prevented not just the attack on the royal family, but potentially dozens of other terrorist incidents. In the secure interrogation rooms at Thames House, Petrov remained largely silent despite intense questioning by MI5 agents. However, Volkov proved more cooperative when faced with evidence of his involvement and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in a British prison. It was supposed to be psychological warfare, Volkov admitted during his second day of interrogation. Create fear, undermine confidence in British security, show that nowhere is safe. The boy was just the beginning. Agent Hammond pressed for more details. What was the ultimate objective? What did you hope to accomplish? Chaos, Volkov replied simply. When people lose faith in their institutions, in their ability to protect even their most important figures, societies begin to collapse from within. That was the goal. The confession confirmed what intelligence analysts had suspected about the broader Russian strategy of destabilization through targeted psychological operations. But the quick resolution of the Windsor Castle incident had prevented the operation from achieving its intended effect. Dr. Thornton faced charges of treason, conspiracy, and endangering the lives of members of the royal family. Her cooperation with the investigation earned her a reduced sentence, but she would still spend many years in prison for her role in the conspiracy. During her final interview, she expressed genuine remorse for her actions. I never imagined they would actually hurt a child, she repeated tearfully. When I saw the news about Prince George being attacked, I realized how naive I had been about their intentions. I just needed the money so desperately. Detective Williams felt little sympathy for the woman who had betrayed her country for personal gain. Your financial problems don't justify putting children in danger, Dr. Thornton. Because of your actions, a 7-year-old boy will have nightmares for years to come. As the legal proceedings began and the full details of the conspiracy were revealed to the public, Princess Charlotte continued her recovery alongside her brother. The experience had matured her in ways that saddened the adults around her, but it had also revealed the strength of character that would serve her well in her future role as a member of the royal family. Commander Morrison received commendations for his role in preventing what could have been a catastrophic attack on the monarchy. But, for him, the greatest reward was seeing Prince George return to his normal activities and watching Princess Charlotte regain her carefree smile. The trust she had placed in him remained one of the most meaningful moments of his career. The conspiracy that began with an attack on a child in the gardens of Windsor Castle had been revealed as an international plot against the very foundations of British democracy. But it had been defeated by the determination of investigators who refused to give up, the courage of a little boy who helped identify his attackers, and the unwavering faith of a sister who believed in justice. Princess Charlotte's simple command to find who hurt my brother had ultimately saved not just her family, but potentially countless other innocent victims of the terrorists' planned campaign of fear. 6 months after the arrest of Viktor Petrov and his conspirators, the Old Bailey courtroom was packed with reporters, security officials, and members of the public who had followed the extraordinary case that began with Princess Charlotte's desperate plea to find her brother's attackers. The trial had captured international attention, not just because of the royal family's involvement, but because it exposed a sophisticated international conspiracy that could have changed the course of British history. Commander Morrison sat in the witness gallery, his dress uniform bearing the new commendation he had received for his role in protecting the royal family and preventing the terrorist attack. Beside him sat Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Williams, who had been promoted to Chief Superintendent following her exemplary work on the case. But both of them knew that their thoughts were with 2 children who had shown remarkable courage in the face of unimaginable danger. Princess Charlotte, now 10 years old, sat in the royal box with her parents, her posture straight and her expression serious as she listened to the proceedings. She had insisted on attending the trial, despite her parents' initial reluctance to expose her to the disturbing details of the case. But Charlotte had argued with a maturity beyond her years that she needed to see justice served for what had been done to her brother. Prince George, now 8 and fully recovered from his physical injuries, sat beside his sister. The psychological effects of his ordeal had required months of therapy, but he had shown remarkable resilience throughout his recovery. The nightmares had gradually faded, replaced by a new confidence that came from knowing his attackers had been caught and would never hurt him again. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Agent Rebecca Hammond from MI5 testified about the international scope of the conspiracy, revealing that the plot against the royal family was part of a broader campaign of destabilization that had targeted democratic institutions across Europe. The defendants were not acting as isolated criminals, Agent Hammond explained to the jury. They were part of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to undermine public confidence in British security and create psychological terror throughout the country. Dr. Margaret Thornton had already pleaded guilty to her charges and had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for treason and conspiracy. Her testimony against Petrov and Volkov was crucial in establishing the timeline and objectives of the plot. She appeared pale and drawn as she took the witness stand, the weight of her betrayal clearly visible in her demeanor. I provided detailed intelligence about the royal family's routines and security arrangements, she admitted, her voice barely audible. The defendants specifically asked for information about the children's activities and the times when security might be less intensive. The defense attorneys for Petrov and Volkov attempted to argue that their clients were merely intelligence operatives following orders and that the attack on Prince George was not intended to cause serious harm. But the evidence presented by the prosecution painted a clear picture of a deliberate and calculated assault on a child. Detective Williams took the stand to present the evidence that had been gathered during the investigation. She described the meticulous planning that had gone into the attack, the sophisticated surveillance equipment found in the warehouse, and the detailed plans for the larger attack on Buckingham Palace that had been prevented. The defendants had prepared a coordinated assault designed to target multiple members of the royal family simultaneously, she testified. The attack on Prince George was specifically intended to test our security responses and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the larger operation. When Commander Morrison was called to testify, he spoke with quiet authority about the discovery of Prince George and the immediate response to the crisis. But what moved the courtroom most was his description of Princess Charlotte's reaction to finding her brother unconscious. Princess Charlotte demonstrated remarkable composure and clarity in an extraordinarily traumatic situation, Morrison testified. Her immediate concern was for her brother's welfare, and her trust in our ability to find his attackers gave all of us the motivation to pursue this case with everything we had. The prosecution also presented evidence about the broader scope of the Russian intelligence operation, including intercepted communications that revealed the conspiracy's ultimate objectives. The goal had been to create such a climate of fear and uncertainty that public confidence in British institutions would be fundamentally undermined. Viktor Petrov took the stand in his own defense, showing no remorse for his actions. He portrayed himself as a patriot serving his country's interests and claimed that the attack on Prince George was justified as part of a broader geopolitical strategy. The British monarchy represents an outdated system that oppresses people around the world, Petrov declared defiantly. Our actions were designed to expose the vulnerabilities of this system and demonstrate that even their most protected figures are not safe. His cold, calculating demeanor as he described the attack on a child horrified everyone in the courtroom. When the prosecutor asked him if he felt any regret for the trauma inflicted on Prince George, Petrov's response chilled the room. Collateral damage is inevitable in any effective operation, he said without emotion. The boy was a strategic target, not a personal victim. Dmitry Volkov chose not to testify, but his recorded confessions from the initial interrogation were played for the jury. His admission that the attack was intended to be just the beginning of a campaign of terror reinforced the prosecution's argument about the defendants' dangerous intentions. The defense's closing argument attempted to portray the defendants as misguided patriots rather than terrorists, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges for both Petrov and Volkov. Judge Sir Michael Harrison delivered the sentences with stern authority. Viktor Petrov received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for terrorism, conspiracy, and the assault of Prince George. Dmitry Volkov received 35 years for his role in the conspiracy and his cooperation in providing intelligence to the prosecution. You targeted a child, Judge Harrison said to Petrov as he delivered the sentence. You planned a coordinated assault on the constitutional monarchy of this nation. You sought to create terror and chaos through violence against innocent people. The sentences I impose today reflect not just the gravity of your crimes, but society's determination to protect our democratic institutions and our most vulnerable citizens. As the sentences were announced, Princess Charlotte reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. Justice had been served, just as Commander Morrison had promised her it would be. The people who had hurt George would never be able to hurt anyone else again. Outside the courthouse, Commander Morrison was approached by representatives from multiple law enforcement agencies who wanted to understand how the investigation had been conducted so successfully. But he consistently credited the teamwork and dedication of everyone involved, particularly praising Detective Williams and Agent Hammond for their expertise and persistence. The case was solved because everyone involved refused to give up, Morrison told the assembled media. From the medical team that cared for Prince George to the analysts who identified the suspects to the tactical officers who arrested them safely, this was a victory for everyone who believes in justice and protecting children. When asked about Princess Charlotte's role in motivating the investigation, Morrison's expression softened. Her Royal Highness showed remarkable courage and faith in a terrifying situation. Her trust that we would find her brother's attackers gave all of us the determination to see this case through to the end. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a chapter, but the effects of the case continued to resonate throughout the Royal Protection Services and intelligence community. New protocols were implemented to prevent similar infiltration attempts, and cooperation between agencies was strengthened based on lessons learned from the investigation. Princess Charlotte and Prince George gradually returned to their normal routines, though the experience had changed them both. Charlotte had developed a deeper understanding of the responsibilities that came with her position, while George had gained a new appreciation for the people who worked to keep their family safe. 3 months after the trial, Commander Morrison was surprised to receive a formal invitation to tea with the royal family. When he arrived at Kensington Palace, he found Princess Charlotte and Prince George waiting for him in the family's private drawing room, along with their parents. "Commander Morrison," Charlotte said formally, standing to greet him with the poise that had been developed through months of royal training. "George, and I wanted to thank you properly for keeping your promise." Prince George stepped forward with a carefully wrapped package. "We made this for you," he said shyly. "Charlotte helped me with the words because I'm not very good at writing yet." Morrison unwrapped the gift to find a hand-drawn card with pictures of the royal family and all the people who had worked to solve the case. Inside, in Charlotte's careful handwriting, was a message that brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you for being our knight in shining armor. You prove that promises matter and that good people will always win against bad people. We will never forget what you did for our family." The Duke of Cambridge spoke with deep sincerity. "Commander Morrison, you went above and beyond your duties to protect our children. Charlotte's faith in you was not misplaced, and we are eternally grateful for everything you and your team accomplished." As Morrison looked at the 2 children who had shown such courage throughout their ordeal, he realized that the case had taught him as much as it had taught them. Princess Charlotte's simple command to find who hurt my brother had demonstrated the power of unwavering faith and determination. Her trust had inspired everyone involved to push harder, dig deeper, and never give up until justice was achieved. The conspiracy that began with an attack on a child in the gardens of Windsor Castle had been thoroughly defeated. The terrorists' plans had been thwarted, their network had been dismantled, and their leaders were now serving life sentences in British prisons. But, perhaps most importantly, 2 children had learned that even in the darkest moments, there were always people willing to fight for justice and protect the innocent. Years later, when Princess Charlotte had grown into her role as a senior member of the royal family, she would often speak about the importance of trusting in the dedication and integrity of the people who serve their country. Her childhood experience of seeing her faith in Commander Morrison rewarded with justice had shaped her understanding of leadership and responsibility. The case had also established new standards for royal protection and counterterrorism operations. The cooperation between different agencies that had been essential to solving the conspiracy became a model for future investigations. The techniques developed during the hunt for Petrov and Volkov were adopted by security services around the world. But for Princess Charlotte and Prince George, the most important lesson was simpler and more personal. They had learned that when faced with injustice, it was possible to trust in good people to make things right. Their faith in Commander Morrison's promise had been rewarded, and that trust had helped heal the trauma of their ordeal. Commander Morrison continued to serve in royal protection for many more years, but he never forgot the case that had begun with a little girl's desperate plea for justice. The memory of Princess Charlotte's trust and determination served as a constant reminder of why his work mattered and what he was ultimately fighting to protect. The conspiracy that had threatened the very foundations of the British monarchy had been defeated not just by superior investigation techniques or advanced technology, but by the simple human virtues of courage, determination, and faith. A child's unwavering belief that justice would prevail had inspired an investigation that saved countless lives and preserved the security of a nation. In the end, Princess Charlotte's command to find who hurt my brother had done more than solve a crime. It had demonstrated that even in the face of sophisticated international conspiracies, the power of truth and justice, when supported by dedicated people who refused to give up, could overcome any threat. The little girl who had demanded justice for her brother had helped save her country, proving that sometimes the smallest voices can inspire the greatest victories.